Cats are weird, y'all. Hey, what's up? I'm Christina, I'm the Laughing Writer, and today is Friday. So guess what? I promised y'all a special reading of a submitted story. Today we're going to go ahead and read a story called How Wind Joined the Sky, an ancient legend retold by Daniel Aartman. It's a pretty short story, and it's actually the first published work for this author. And if you like what you hear today, I'm actually going to go ahead and put a link in the description box to his other published works. But he definitely has some other stories and some other works that you can check out if you like what you hear today. All right, let's get started. How Wind Joined the Sky. Author's note. The story you are about to read is a work of fiction. It was not found in some archaeological dig site recovered from a long-lost civilization. It has not been preserved in history texts, and it does not describe any group's understanding of how this world came to be the way it is. It is the product of someone's imagination, admittedly the imagination of someone who has long been fascinated by stories of the ancient gods. This is not, in the truest sense of the word, a legend. Then again, what does a story need for it to become legend except that it be spread, passed along, and retold? Alright. It was long ago, when the sky was still and unmoving, that the Great Mother gave life to the mankind. It was out of her love for what she had created that she gave the mankind the precious gift of the land. The land would sustain them, provide them their source of food and shelter, but much more than this, the land would give them adventure. With the land, the Great Mother had given the mankind an endless source of region to explore and discover. She had given them color and variety and wondrous beauties to behold. The land would be the mankind's home, and with it, she had placed such precious things within their spirits, for it was the land that would cause them to feel belonging, to feel pride at their accomplishments, and give them an idea of who they were. A gift as wonderful as the land required a great deal of care and tending, and that responsibility the Great Mother gave to her children. Her firstborn was her daughter, whom she had named Wind. Wind's role was to spread the plants across the land so that as the mankind moved and explored, they would always find what they needed. Wind would take the seeds from each tree and carry them far. She would plant the seeds beneath the ground, and before long, new trees would grow, blooming with sweet and colorful fruits the man would pluck and enjoy when they were ready. Wind was the swiftest there was. She could move gracefully across land, sometimes quick enough to be a memory. She made her home in the rock canyons and the high mountains, though she would move all across the land. As she moved, she would sing in a soft voice, something like a whistle or a gentle howl. The quicker she went, the stronger her song. She was also a wonderful artist. As she moved this way and that, she would carve the mighty stones, sliding her fingers across their face, etching new lines and indentations and shaping them into the most beautiful and strong pieces of art. When the mankind would visit her canyons, they would marvel at the masterpieces she had made. They would describe her as being cold. When she was near, their skin would chill. This cooling would come as a relief on a hot day in the light of the sun, but when the air was already cold and the mankind huddled for warmth beneath their layers of cloth, Wind's presence could make them miserable. Wind was naturally very playful. She was fascinated by the cloths that the mankind wore and their long hair atop their heads. When she moved past them, she would reach out her hand and tap them with her fingers, delighting in the way they would bounce and sway. More than all of this, Wind was the strongest that there was. She never ran out of energy. She was always moving, though sometimes more quickly than others, and she never grew tired of carrying things from one place to another. She even found the energy to carry her smaller brother Rain as he went about his work. It was Rain's task to spread water across the land, for the plants to drink so they could grow and bloom. Rain would go to the sea and scoop the water into his hands. He would then walk the land and gradually spread his fingers so the water would fall upon the ground to be soaked up. Rain delighted in his work. He would smile as he varied how much he would separate his fingers. Sometimes he held his fingers barely a hair's breadth apart, so the water fell slowly and sporadically, coating the land with drops. Sometimes he had fun throwing his hands open, so that the water seemed to gush down and drench the land. There were some of the mankind who loved rain. As he came by, they would stand outside with their arms spread to feel the water spill down onto their skin. These were his favorite to visit. Most, however, seemed to regard him with a sort of begrudged gratitude. They understood that his water was needed so their plants would grow, and they did genuinely express their appreciation, but they did not seem to enjoy when he was around. Most of the mankind would go inside their shelters and cover themselves from the falling water whenever rain was nearby. They did, however, tend to love it just after he had passed by a place. They loved to see the sky clear of all the dust he had settled to the ground. Colors always seemed so much more bright, more vivid and vibrant when rain had just left. The drops of water which settled on the leaves and the grass would catch the rays of light from the sun and sparkle as if they were precious stones. Rain had an innate sense of rhythm. Wherever he went, he would tap his fingers on whichever surface was near. He would tap the walls of the mankind's dwellings or the trees. He would even lean down and tap his fingers in rhythm against the ground. Sometimes his beat was slow and his fingertips would bounce so softly. Other times his hand made the sound of heavy, fast drums that no one could keep up with. Always in time, always to a measured beat. He would vary his speed as his water dropped. It was from rain that the mankind learned to make music. They would listen to his rhythm and tap along with him, adding to the symphony of sound. They would stretch strings across wood and pluck as rain came by. They learned to make horns to blow air through. Musicians who learned their rhythm from rain were the most talented and passionate artists. Rain made his home in the forests. He loved to pour his water in huge groves of trees. The more he watered them, the more they would reach towards the heavens. The trees would grow tall, thick, and strong, and the creatures of the land would fill the forest. Their sounds would join with rain's rhythm and create music that was all around. Since his older sister was always moving about the land anyway, Rain would sometimes use her for a ride. He would sit atop her strong shoulders and hold his hands out in front of them both, letting the water drip and drop down to the land as she whisked him along. Wind did not bring Rain with her everywhere she went, but the pair did make a wonderful team. Wind helped to ensure that the water from the sea made it everywhere on the land, and the both of them working together made the land thrive. It was rich and green and full of life. The youngest son of the Great Mother was called Storm. Unlike his sister or brother, Storm grew into something that the mankind would dread. Storm's role was to remove what had died on the land and make room for new life to grow. When plants had dried and turned brown, Storm would lift them from the ground and cast them aside. His siblings could then grow something new and fresh in its places. This made Storm angry. He felt that his sister and his brother had been given work that was more glamorous and important. He would listen to the mankind speak praise of wind and rain for their work in bringing new growth, but no one ever talked about what good that Storm did. Storm was young, and since his youth was filled with anger and envy, he did not grow or mature as he should have. Storm had the most terrible temper, and he never learned to keep it in his control. In many ways, he remained a petulant child. When thoughts of his siblings or frustrations with his work would come to his mind, Storm's eyes would flash with a brilliant, bright light. It was bright enough to illuminate everything around him, though only for a brief electric moment. When that happened, Storm could no longer see anything or think clearly. As his rage would set in, he would let out a horrible cry. His voice boomed loud enough to shake the ground around him. The thunderous clamor could be heard for miles wherever he was, a deafening roar. With hands balled into fists, Storm would swing his arms wildly. He paid no attention to anything that was around him. He would simply smash. The destruction that he would cause was incredible, and he was so blinded in his fury that he felt no remorse or regret. He felt nothing but rage until it subsided. With each day, Storm's anger grew, and his tantrums became more and more frequent. There was hardly a time that Storm could be seen that his temper was not flaring like a blazing fire. Seeing his younger brother behave in such a way was heartbreaking for Rain, who loved his brother dearly. He tried to calm and soothe Storm, playing his melody and tapping his fingers in a rhythm that could have relaxed any of the mankind, but Storm would not have it. Nothing could be done to satisfy Storm's craving to rampage. To Wind, it was becoming clear that Storm posed a threat to the mankind. Whenever Storm came near them, he brought with him devastation and ruin. Those whom he did not kill and cast aside were left in ruin after Storm had wrought havoc among everything they owned. Storm's path was that of a chaos, and Wind knew that something must be done to protect them. Storm was in the midst of one of his dreadful fits, thrashing one of the mankind's towns when Wind came up abruptly behind her brother. She wrapped one strong arm around her young brother and began to carry him away. This was no trouble for one as strong as Wind. She carried Storm away from the mankind up to a high mountain. All the while Storm thrashed and swung his limbs wildly, savagely. His eyes flashed with bright light again and again. His voice continued to bellow its thunder. Wind was not deterred. She was far stronger than her brother, even with the power of his mighty wrath. Rain kept pace with Wind as she whisked along. He spilled his water to the ground and continued to tap his fingers in time, trying in vain to cool his brother's burning fury. It was to no avail. Storm raged on and on. Confident that Wind had taken Storm as far away from the mankind as was possible, she dropped him onto the thick, cold ice that covered the mountain. Still blind in his tantrum, Storm immediately began to smash the ice with powerful fists. Chunks of the frozen water sprayed into the air around the three of them. Wind and Rain stood back and watched their brother furiously hammer away. Chunks of ice were flying so wildly that it was not long before they lost sight of Storm. All they could see was a flurry of white whipping in front of them. By now, the two realized that they could not even get to Storm if they tried. Much less could they stop him. So they turned to head back down the mountain to go about their work. It was hours before Storm began to calm. His temper settled only just enough that he could think clearly about Wind bringing him here. With that, his outrage rose again, only now it was focused on his sister. He ran down the mountain toward her, smashing everything in his way. Wind was carrying seeds in a valley, while Rain had returned to the sea to draw more water to spread across the land. She heard Storm's thunderous rumble long before he arrived. She turned and waited for him patiently, watching his bright flashes across the sky coming closer and closer. When Storm was near enough to reach, he leaped toward her, his arms spread and ready to thrash her. She was prepared, of course, and she easily caught him, with one arm held tight around his midsection. Just as before, she carried him away from the mankind as he tossed and bucked in fury. This time she carried him out to the desert, where the land was most dry and hot, and nothing green could grow. Sand flew in every direction as he writhed until, again, Wind could not see anything else. As she left him there, a cycle had begun. Wind and Rain would go about their work tending to the land. Storm would run to them, booming and flashing. Wind would pick him up and carry him far away from the mankind while he thrashed. Rain following along, dropping his water and keeping his rhythm in a relentless and futile attempt to soothe the younger brother. Storm would rage and throw his tantrums while Wind and Rain went back to work until Storm would run towards them again and the cycle would repeat. The only part which seemed to vary was where Wind would decide to leave Storm. He would thrash in the ice and snow, or throw mud in the marshes. He would whip and whirl the dust in the dry valleys and smash the trees in the forests. More than once, Wind even brought Storm to the shore by the edge of the sea where she would throw him as far as her strong arms would allow. She would watch as the water rose into the sky from his violent gestures. Each time, no matter how far he had been taken or how long he had raged, he would follow after his older siblings, laying devastation to whatever was in his path. Because of Storm, the mankind grew weary of both Wind and Rain. When Wind was near them, they would look to one another with uneasy, nervous expressions, and whisper between themselves in hushed, foreboding tones, "Storm is coming." Storm was not always with the others. Sometimes Wind would come carrying Rain as he gently and evenly watered the land. Sometimes Wind came by herself and swept through their midst in a blur. Eventually, though, the mankind knew that Storm would return, and there was nothing that they could do to defend themselves against the whims of his terrible fury. It happened one day while Storm was away and Rain was pouring his water upon the green trees of the forest that Wind came to a quiet meadow with a beautiful pond. Beside the water stood a tall willow tree. Its long strands of leaves draped down to the ground like a fabric curtain, some even spilling into the water itself. It was a peaceful place beneath a bright, joyful sun in the sky. Wind walked slowly through the tall grass when she heard the sound of someone humming. It was a sweet sound, but very soft. She kept as still as she could and tried not to make any noise as she moved closer. The first thing she saw was his hair. Long golden curls extended from the top of his head down around his shoulders and fell between his shoulder blades on his back. Wind saw that his hair was swaying gently, and she realized it was because his body was moving very slowly along with the tune he hummed. This was Breeze. He sat by the edge of the water, his posture relaxed and comfortable. His foot was partially submerged, and he gently kicked it back and forth to the same slow rhythm as his head moved. This caused the surface of the water to ripple outward. Wind watched. It was enchanting, hypnotic. Wind was not sure how long she watched the gentle, slow movement of the water before she was aware that Breeze was looking up at her, an expression on his face that she had never seen anyone give her. This was a look of adoration and of appreciation. Breeze looked at her, seeming to see everything about her, and she could see from his eyes that he thought she was wonderful. Breeze had an appreciation for all things of beauty, and he could see beauty in everything. He found joy everywhere he was. He spent much of his time admiring. He would sit and admire the sun as it rose in the morning and set at dusk beyond the horizon. When he walked, he would hold his hand out to stroke the tall grass, admiring the way it moved with his touch like waves moved along the water. Everywhere Breeze went felt to him like home, and every moment he tried to experience completely, but above all else, Breeze admired Wind. Breeze understood more than any of the mankind how much Wind did for the land and for the mankind, and he praised her for her wonderful work. Wind loved the way he spoke about her, always with a voice as soft as a whisper, and the way he looked at her. Breeze made Wind feel special and perfect. Wind came often to the meadow to find Breeze and sit beside him. She took every chance she could to set aside her work and join him, always finding him there to greet her with the warmest and purest smile. Breeze, for his part, was generous with his affections. His hands were so gentle, and he would touch her almost constantly. He stroked her arm, barely touching her soft skin, but causing in her a reaction that was somehow, at the same time, both soothing and exhilarating. He would caress her every chance he had, and always moved as close to her as he could be. His presence seemed to envelop her in the best way. She loved to play with his long, curly hair. She would run her fingers through the gold strands impishly, enjoying the way it seemed to bounce. It seemed to move very much like the leaves of the willow tree, and she often would play with both, one hand in his hair, the other in the leaves, feeling delighted as they bounced and swayed in unison. Breeze made Wind more gentle, helped her to see more of the wonders that were always around her. She would emulate his soft, tender touches and his joyous view of everything. She found that even when she was away from him, she thought of him, waiting eagerly to return to the one she loved. Wind was her very best self when she was with Breeze. The only thing which Breeze seemed not to love or admire was Storm. Whenever he knew Storm was coming near, he would grow uneasy. Wind and Breeze would sit together in the meadow, and in the distance they would hear Storm's thunder. He would look to the horizon, seeing the angry flashes light up the sky, growing nearer and nearer, and his face would turn nervous. Wind, of course, seeing the distressed look on her lover's face, would quickly run to intercept Storm and take him away. Breeze and Storm were complete opposites. For all that Breeze was soft and gentle, Storm was rough and boisterous. Where Breeze was slow and took time to enjoy everything around him, Storm did nothing but destroy and wreak havoc. Breeze was completely comfortable avoiding Storm as often as he could. Breeze enjoyed Rain, though. He loved the music Rain would play, and he would have been content to sit with Wind and Rain and let the days pass by, but he knew that they had work to do. Most often, Wind and Breeze would sit in the meadow and relax, so lost in the beauty of their time together that they had no idea how long had passed until Rain would come close, lightly sprinkling the pair with water to remind them it was time to return to their task. Breeze would gently push Wind away, reminding her with a smile that he would be there for her whenever she returned. This was a pattern with which they were all content, until one day that Wind left Storm to rage on the top of a mountain. This time, unlike most, Storm settled enough to look down and take in the sight of the land below. His eyes came upon the meadow where Wind was sitting with Breeze. Storm saw in his sister's face that she was happy. This made him more furious than he had ever been before. His thunder bellowed so loudly that all of the mankind heard him. On hearing his roar, Wind took off toward her young brother. She grabbed him and ran toward the sea. Just as always, Storm thrashed and threw the water, but for the first time his rage was not blind. Storm's fury grew focused, and he decided, for once, to be patient. He waited until Wind was carrying rain about the land, far away from the sea. Storm came to the shore and ran, but, unlike every time before, he did not run toward his older siblings. This time, he ran straight for the meadow, where Breeze sat playing with the willow tree's leaves. He did not shout or scream the way that was normal for him, but his eyes flashed brighter than ever before. Breeze saw the light dance across the rippling surface of the water. He saw the shadows rush about the trees and the lightning show their color more vibrant and vivid for only an instant. He could not help but see the beauty in it, even though he knew it meant that Storm was coming for him. And that's all I'm going to read. What is Storm going to do to Breeze? Is Breeze going to do anything to Storm, or will Wind be able to save Breeze? I guess in order to find out, you're just going to have to go read the rest of it on your own. And actually, Wind hasn't joined the sky yet either, so technically this question has not been answered yet. So that was our submitted work. I hope everyone really enjoyed it, and if you want to catch more of Daniel's work, like I said, I'll put a link in the description below, and if you want to catch more stuff here on The Laughing Writer, be sure to hit that subscribe button, and I'll see you all on Monday. Bye!